I read this book, and it's called Sanford Meisner on Acting, and it's written by Sanford Meisner and Dennis Longwell. It's organized as a transcript of one of his acting classes, so the reading audience can learn alongside the fellow actors and benefit from their questions and mistakes. So it's different from like a straightforward lecture on how to act, for example. Like it has examples in the book about the students actually learning the process and the games that he teaches to help improve their acting skills. The second half are discussions of their final scenes, their final projects, but I want to focus on the first 10 chapters, which are the actual lessons. So the first chapter is called Setting the Scene, Jesus' Blush. The book begins by describing Meisner's early life and how he became an actor, and then his rise to fame. But I'm going to spare the details and get to the point of the first chapter. Although Meisner was a great actor, the way he got his emotional fulfillment was from acting and from teaching technique, based on the guiding principle that art expresses human experience. His favorite example is that of Eleonora Duse' performance as Magda in Herman Suderman's Heimat, which means home. And this particular scene involved Magda's, the woman's, child's father, who happened to be a friend of her family, which she did not know. So they're returning to a dinner scene. So George Bernard Shaw, the reviewer of this play, talked about the fine detail of the blush that overcame Magda when she saw the fact that this was her child's father. And he described it as a perfectly genuine effect of the dramatic imagination. Meisner idolizes this moment particularly because it is the epitome of living truthfully under imaginary circumstances, which is basically his definition of good acting. In fact, there's a quotation that Meisner has framed in his office, and it shows just how much he wants people to be actually good actors. And it's, "I wish the stage were as narrow as the wire of a tightrope dancer, so that no incompetent would dare step upon it." Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I thought that was pretty interesting. Moving on to the first lesson, Chapter 2. This is the very first thing that Meisner ever said to his class. The foundation of acting is the reality of doing. So, doing something not as your character, but actually doing something as yourself. And so at the beginning he asks people to just sit and listen to see if they could hear cars outside in Manhattan. As themselves, not as a character, not pretending to listen to cars, actually listening for cars, how many cars you could count. And the exercise that basically exemplifies this is a word repetition game. The purpose of it is to make sure you really listen to your partner. So at first it's very mechanical and inhuman, but it really makes you pay rapt attention to your partner, their intonation, their posture, their facial expression. For example, if I said, "Your hair is shiny, your hair is shiny, your hair is shiny, your hair is shiny," you would say it the same thing over and over again, just to make sure you're really listening to your partner, which is kind of hard for me to show here without a partner, but I'll do the best I can. So the point is not to focus on yourself as a character, but to actually do what the character should be doing. But in that way, by doing what the character should actually be doing in the script, you're actually creating the character yourself, right then and there. Chapter 3 takes the game further. So now they make a change in the point of view in a word repetition game to provide more of a sense of human speech and interaction, which is another element to be added. So reaction. Instinct is supposed to be used to change the dialogue of the word repetition game. Once the repetition changes you personally or creates a spontaneous reaction in you or your partner, you're supposed to change the dialogue, just as one would in real life, in reaction to something that the other person does. What's really important is to not repeat the same line once you feel the need to change it. For example, there was in the class there was an example that was given that someone was talking about someone poked someone else in the back, and you poked me in the back, I poked you in the back, you poked me in the back, I poked you in the back. What's funny? What's funny? What's funny? What's funny? You don't want to have that last change. And I'm sorry about this, about I can't really do the repetition game with myself, but basically you don't want to say the same line in a different intonation because that means you're reading into it. You don't want to read into the text. You want to go off of impulses. And your impulse at that point would be to change the dialogue. And so the whole point of this is that good acting comes from your heart, and there's no mentality in that. Is what Meisner says. And then the second part of this lesson comes from the belief that talent comes from simple, uncluttered, unrestrained instinct. You have to be open and honest, not logical and polite as someone would be in normal society. Basically, you don't do anything in the exercise unless something happens to make you do it. So what you do doesn't depend on you, it depends on the other fellow. Chapter 4 takes it even farther, it takes it to a physical level by adding an independent activity. So one person is to be doing a difficult, nearly all-consuming activity that has to have a really strong reason for them to be doing it. And they actually have to really be doing it, of course, and still engage in the word repetition game with their partner. For example, on page 38, it gives, one of his students is given a telephone directory of Manhattan. He's supposed to sit down, and Meisner tells him, "Last week, Vince, you met a beautiful girl at a party, and she said, 'I'm having a party next Saturday night, and if you want to come to it, my family is in Europe, so you can stay all night.'" So she gave him a sheet of paper with her name and address. Unfortunately, he lost it, and her last name was Smith. So Meisner gives him the task of looking up under 14 pages of Smith in the phone book for Manhattan her name. So basically, he's giving Vincent an independent activity that is really difficult to do, nearly impossible, but must be all-consuming, and a strong reason behind it to do it. And the reason behind this would be because he wants to go to the party because she's a beautiful girl. When this exercise is performed, he starts looking at the phone book intensely, looking for the name. A girl walks in and asks, looking for something. And it keeps going. And basically the point of this is he's allowed to ignore her until something makes it so that he has to react. So if someone's intensely involved in an activity, writing a paper or talking on the phone or something like that, only when a stimulus is presented that is strong enough or annoying enough or whatever it is that makes you change it, that is the only time when you're supposed to change it. You're not supposed to do anything unless some event, something that your partner does, actually makes you change whatever you're doing. On instinct. So basically, again, what is stressed there is silence. Because if you're doing an important activity, you don't necessarily have to respond to the person. So you could just be sitting there, glance up, give an annoyed look. That's exactly what happened. And one of the people asked in the book to Mr. Meisner, what about silence? Is that nothing? Silence is not nothing. He says it's a moment in itself. Again, you can give an annoyed look, an angry look, and stuff like that. So basically, he urges people to keep silent and still until something happens to make you do something. And another quote that he says is, "Acting is not talking; it's living off of the other fellow." And he also stresses the fact that it's important to not be audience conscious, to have something called a public solitude. For example, if someone's just standing there on the stage and brushing their hair, it has to be a completely relaxed behavior, as if no one is watching. So that moves on to chapter 5 after that. So it makes the independent activity, less dire, and the game less repetitious, moving on to more of an improvised scene, more than an exercise. For example, on page 97, he discusses a Strindberg character. Her name was a Strindberg character, Miss Julie. Basically, she's a man destroyer because she hates them so much. But she has another goal. She also has to look beautiful so that she can entice them and then destroy them. And so there's an inner life which you have to take on, which would be hating men. or destroying, wanting to destroy men. But the outwardly, you also have to express desire to be beautiful, to be alluring, to be attractive. So for you to actually be able to use that preparation, if you're doing an improv exercise or if you're actually in a scene, you have to make it real enough so that you would be able to understand it emotionally. For example, that would be really hard to understand. For me personally, because I don't have anything in my past like that. But again, that's where Meisner's fantasy, using your imagination, comes into play. And also using perhaps the physical preparation to get you into that anger, but yet still alluring sense. That one's a kind of tough example. So one thing that he says, after you do your preparation, you come into the exercise. After that, you're supposed to allow what exists to affect you, rather than trying to work out of your head or what you think should exist. So you're working from moment to moment. And he also reminds you to not limit your emotional behavior, because he basically says, screw being polite, screw being logical, work off of inner instinct. Because we've all been taught to basically hold in our instinct and be polite in public and not tell people, or actual and thinking. But in acting, you have to let all of that go, all of your proprieties go, and work off of instinct, because that's the only way you can simulate reality on the stage. Chapter 8 clarifies the source of preparation. He said, the text is like a canoe, and the river on which it sits is emotion. So he stresses to not try to learn your lines in relation to the emotion you think they should have. He says that the canoe goes wherever the river goes. So basically, once you get the emotion that you think, that the emotion that you're going to ride into the scene, the words will come out the way they should. And another thing is, he says it's easier if you have a preparation that comes from less from reality and more from fantasy, because there's less logic involved, and you can actually have a stronger emotion that comes from fantasy than you can from reality. If you don't believe me, just think about any of your dreams. Think about how crazy and how large and over the top and larger than life your dreams are, your wishes and your expectations in your dreams.